Hello, good morning, afternoon, evening. Thank you for your patience while we've been waiting a few more people. Uh, it is an eclectic topic, perhaps today, a specialized one. We have several people registered, but we'll see whether they join us. In any case, we'll try to have a good substantive discussion in view of the fourth Financing for Development conference that will take place in Seville, in Spain, in late June, end of June, beginning of July. So in less than a month, it will start. So thank you very much for being with us. And some of you, once again, thank you for regularly attending our open consultations. Regarding today's topic, I would like to make a brief introduction, and then we can, as usual, whoever wants raises their hand, hopefully the electronic hand, otherwise the actual hand, and we'll try to pay attention so that you can also contribute from your perspective and your experience. The idea is that this fourth conference on financing for development follows on the Addis Ababa conference of 2015. So it is the fourth in the series, and the focus usually for the developing countries is development assistance, burden, debt reduction, and etc., which is under threat in a way currently by current developments when we see that the whole areas of activity, of economic activity like trade, uh, are in turmoil, plus the geopolitical considerations, the problems with the ongoing wars, humanitarian emergencies, and all that. So it's not a normal time, but it may be the time to bring about some kind of new beginning for this financing for development, which for some, as I said, perhaps mostly the developing countries, is about development assistance and the dues that the North should be paying and the West. And for others is, for the West is preserving their interests in a way, and also the financial system as it is, while making some concessions and looking at issues like financing and trade and debt. So you may know that the fourth preparatory commission of this conference has recently concluded, right, in New York, and there is a draft document. There was a zero draft. There is a first draft of the outcome because these conferences are pre-cooked in a way, right? So people participate in preparatory meetings in order when they go there to Seville from 30th of June to 3rd of July to have more of a celebration, iron out a few final details, and then have the final document adopted, usually by consensus. But I understand that this year we may end up having a vote because even from the preamble uh, of this draft final document, we have disagreements by the US on using terms even like sustainable development goals, 2030 agenda, and other things that were considered a given by everybody before the current administration. So there may be a need for a vote in Seville, and we may have more like things opening up at the last minute. And so, what else? The chapters of this outcome document for you to see what is the breadth of the issues covered by the Financing for Development Conference. I can read them to you quickly. Are, as I said, the preamble, which is the preface, the principles, the general global financing framework, and there is a call for a renewed financing framework, action areas, domestic public resources and their mobilization, right? And then it's the next chapter is on domestic, international, private business and finance. So public resources, private resources, domestic and international. the international development cooperation, what we know ODA, the 0.7%, etc. Then we go to international trade as an engine for development. That's another chapter. Debt and debt sustainability, another chapter. International financial architecture and systemic issues, like with the IFIs, the regional, the multilateral development banks, SDGs, uh, issued by the IMF, etc. Science, technology, innovation, capacity building, and data monitoring and follow up to this agreement, the eventual agreement. So there is a wide range of issues, and for each one of them, there are some sticking points, there are some points of broad acceptance, and there are some innovative points also. And I will close this introduction by saying that folks and partners, we are trying to have a side event to introduce some innovative elements to this debate. And our partners are in the Global South Perspectives Network, the Inclusive Society Institute of South Africa, and we have Dario Swanepoel from there, and the Humanizacom group from Sao Paulo, Brazil, with Selene Victor. I don't know if she will manage to join us, but we want to see, for example, Daryl will tell us his ideas about indebtedness and how it could be reduced for developing countries. My own preoccupation is that after so many years of ODA, we don't see much progress. And again, we have indebtedness, we have problems with the trade imbalances, etc. How can we help developing countries uh, stand on their own feet and create their own domestic economies in a functioning way with the food sovereignty at least secured with the proper rules, gender gender sensitive rules and all these things to make their own economies work without depending on philanthropy or ODA from outside, which anyway ODA to a large extent returns to the country or the regional organization that contributes it, because usually the money goes to consultants from that country or regional organization, companies from there. So there isn't much left to the actual recipient country that's supposed to benefit from it. Um, with all this in mind, right, and trade also, we saw when tariffs increase, then countries, especially the least the strong ones that cannot fight back, are perhaps closed off, shut out of big markets. So if they depend too much on that, or they have only one culture, monoculture, or they are limited in a supply chain, then they can really suffer major impact on their overall economy and even the survival of their population. And we want to change this mentality while, of course, the negotiations for climate finance and and payment of compensation for things that are caused by others, but they're suffered by the developing countries, should continue to be demanded and considered. That's it from my side, and I hope that we'll hear more from you. And of course, you can disagree on whatever I said. Thank you. Who would like to take the floor first? Daryl, may I ask you to perhaps come in for the debt crisis?
Sure. Thank you, Georges, and good afternoon, everybody. So the issue that I'm crusading and that the Institute is crusading is the issue of climate finance. Now, at the last COP, and in fact the previous one, much was made of the development assistance that Europe and the United States and the developed world would give to the developing world to finance the just energy transition. They had committed something like $300 billion a year for the next 10 years, making it 3 trillion US dollars that they made available, which on the face of it seems good. The problem is when one digs down into what that finance entails, one finds that it is only a small amount that is grant financing. By far, the vast majority of the assistance given is what they call concessional loans at very low interest rates, maybe 2 or 3%, which on the face of it also looks good. But we have two problems with it. The first is a moral and ethical question. It was the developed world that have created, to a large extent, this climate problem. And yet, the developing world now have to help pay to fix the problem that they created. And should it not be that those that created the problem take a greater responsibility for solving the problem than what they are taking? They are now sharing that problem with people that didn't create the problem in the first place. So that's a moral and an ethical question. Now, that's going to be a very difficult sell given the current economic conditions of the developed world, who themselves do not have the vast amounts of money to finance this, and also who there seems to be a changing narrative where it's far more inward looking, and aid is to a large extent being cut and reduced. But anyhow, nevertheless, we put this moral and ethical question out there as the background. And we focus now on the actual finance given. So if you give a concessional loan to a developing country at 2 or 3%, which seems good, what it does not factor in is that the developing world's currency is far more volatile than the developed world. So you find that in South Africa, we did an exercise in South Africa, for example, where if one were to have taken a 100 billion loan from the Europeans in 2015, the currency, the South African currency, devalued against the euro by 22%. So what was initially a cheap loan, because of the currency volatility, it actually becomes an expensive loan. So what are we saying to solve that problem? We are saying that well, what is the problem with this volatility? This is twofold. First of all, it's becoming expensive, and secondly, how do you expect an African finance minister or another developing world's finance minister to properly budget debt repayments over a 10 or 15-year period if they have no idea what the currency is going to do? So in fact, what it can do is it can actually lead to a debt trap for many developing countries, where more and more of their operational budget is having to go into financing debt. So the solution that we have is that we say that the loans, maybe just interrupt myself for a minute by saying the Norwegians made, I think, something like $300 billion available to the South African government for financing. And that was not taken up for this very reason, that it would lead to a debt trap, and there wasn't predictability in how they would be able to pay it back. So the gesture seems seems heroic, etc. But in fact, it's a hollow gesture. So we say to solve this problem, let's have the concessional loans, but issued in local currency. So in other words, the 300 billion rand loan is not issued in euros, it is issued in rands. Now, the South African government would know exactly what they are in for financially, and they are able to properly plan the servicing of their debt over the next 10 to 15 years. The currency depreciation risk then lies with the developing world. Now I go back to the moral and ethical argument that we put on the table, that they should in fact give more grants, but we understand the current economic conditions. So we say, all right, you may not give those grants, but at least the minimum you can do, because it is essentially your problem, the minimum you can do is to pick up the currency risk, the risk attached to a volatile currency. And I think that is a moral call that we make to them, in short.
Thank you, Daryl. Is this solution only for the concessional loans for climate finance, or it could be expanded to other loans developing countries get from developed countries and the IMF perhaps?
Yeah, well, I'm sure it can be expanded to others, but one will have to look at what the actual finance is for. We are talking about the climate finance because of the fact that it is not the making of the developing world, it is the making of the developed world, and therefore there is a moral and ethical obligation there. I guess we haven't looked into that, but I guess you could also look at maybe the impact of colonialism and how that has made a continent like Africa and Indonesia and these places that has set them back to the advantage of the developing world, and therefore you can draw a line and say there's a moral and ethical obligation there as well. I don't know. I haven't given that thought. That is something that we can give thought to, but we are very clear on the climate finance, which is acknowledged. Even the developed world acknowledge it is a problem caused mainly by them.
Great, thank you. Very clear. Anybody on that? Any comment? Any climate finance or debt expert among us? Yes, Arthur.
Well, I think we're looking at a fundamental problem of an entire economic system that is basically colonial in its focus. It has been for decades. And there's always been a denial on the part of the wealthy countries and the corporate sector to accept any responsibility for damage done by the economic activities. Those are externalities to be ignored. And I think so it's a fundamental challenge of the whole system. And I think when you look at the debt issue, there's actually an enormous debt bubble everywhere. The American government is deeply in debt. And, consumers are in debt, corporations are in debt. It's like the whole system is being driven on continuing borrowing to try to keep the system afloat by borrowing more and more. But can that go on forever? In the wealthy countries can sort of hide that because they're able to manipulate their financial system in some way that they can sort of go on accumulating debt. The poor developing countries are trapped on that debt trap because they've never been allowed to develop industries that can actually use their natural resources and sell the products. They've simply been exploited to sell the primary resources to the industries of the North to support. So it's a fundamental problem of the entire system that is deeply immoral and badly broken. And I think, I don't know what they can do with this meeting coming up, in Seville, but I think we have to acknowledge the fact that it's highly fragile, and there could easily be, a breakdown in the entire system because you cannot keep accumulating debt forever. And I think in that context, then, the developers have to be sort of saying, how can they, ensure a certain amount of survivability if the global economic system is not able to keep limp along as it has been for now, and how can they ensure some kind of welfare for their populations with more resilience in the face of the challenges that may be coming? So I think it's a much larger question. I'm actually taking part in a meeting next weekend. I think George will be there as well, looking at systemic risk. And I think that the whole issue of systemic risk is one that now needs to be flagged to the financial community, that they're much more vulnerable to such risk than they may have realized, that business as usual can't go on forever. And therefore, if that issue can be put on the table for the meeting in Seville, as a sort of a warning that they cannot assume that they have to be ready to make adjustments now to try to reduce the vulnerability of the system to the risks that are coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur, indeed. And we have to say the debt issue, obviously, across the board and north and south. And I don't know if they could be written off some of these debt as mutual debt, or to whom it is owed, sorry, and who owns it, and what impact it would have, because some of this debt is held by pension funds, for example. And if you said you don't pay anymore, perhaps people will lose their pensions. Some of it is big companies, some of it is China holding part of the US debt, right? So I don't know what it would cause if we really thought about that, but at some point there should be at least a serious looking into this to see how we can start afresh. Because, right, I mean, all this money that is supposed to be there and it's not, if anybody had it, then it would probably increase inflation worldwide. There is no correspondence to goods and everything, and could mess up the whole thing and lead us perhaps, I don't know, even to war if demands from all sides increase. So, I mean, is there anybody, are you aware of any approach, theoretical or attempt at the practical level, to really square off with this big debt problem around the world? Yeah, I don't know. Stiglitz, perhaps, or others have written about it, and there may have been some kind of proposal.
May I say something, please?
Yes, of course, Delphin.
Hello, everyone. Well, what Arthur has mentioned was actually I was going to highlight it. In addition to that, I just want to say we have another problem because, since Donald Trump has become in the power, he withdrew completely from the climate change. So a country is in heavily, debt to United Nations, and United Nations also substantially relying on the income and, the fund from the America. It all has been cut. I was reading an article quite concerning that, saying that even the United Nations, the finance could collapse because of all this issue is going on. So really, what can we do to just, and somehow make America and other country to pay at least their debt to UN? And then, the climate change is the second issue. Then we can argue about it, because while the fund is not coming to UN, then we can't do anything, really. That's my concern.
Thank you. It's true that the regular budget of the UN per year is about 3.7 or something billion. It's not that much compared to the 300 billion, but of course, that is meant for many countries for climate finance per year. But the UN is getting ready to cut posts to streamline the workforce, as they say, 20% across the board, and other measures because, for example, the Trump administration has asked for $0 in the current appropriation, the budgetary process of the US in Congress for the UN and many other organizations of the UN system and other intergovernmental organizations. And that will be horrible. Already they owe a lot of money for the regular budget as well as for the peacekeeping budget. For the peacekeeping budget, I understand that they intend to give some more than $1 billion, but again, for the existing peacekeeping operations, other big contributors to the UN, which is their obligation, right, to keep it going. It's the membership that pays their dues according to their capacity to pay. Even the Chinese and others owe money they delay their payments. And I know that the Europeans have said they don't intend to pay extra to cover anybody else's dues. So yeah, there is a problem there. The UN is threatened not only in terms of for the substance of its work, like now the sustainable development, the SDGs are not recognized by everybody as they used to be, but they are also, they may not be able to operate to their departments, etc. There is a good rationale also for rethinking parts of the UN, what is needed more, what is needed less, but not under this pressure of cutting money without unilaterally and without having thought through the impact that they will have, or perhaps those who are doing it, they have thought through, they want to undermine the UN completely. Yeah, but over time there can be, of course, reform, thinking of what is more important now and more efficient, but also effective. But this is not the way it's been done. And you're right, there is a big problem there too. Yeah. Anybody, any other comment on debt and payments? Because if not, I would like to convey a message from Sakiko Fukuda Par. She's not here with us, right? She couldn't make it today, but she has written an article with Isabel Ortiz, and they talk about the lack, the absence actually of the social from the social aspects from the Financing for Development conference, and they say financing for whom? The Financing for Development Summit must address social dimensions. Because they say this discussion, their article has been published in the IPS Inter Press Service. They say that all this discussion is a bit at the abstract financial level, but it doesn't take into account what are the impacts for real people, for women, for the more vulnerable and the societies. So if we started from that, let's say, do we want the economy to work in a certain mathematical way for the economists to understand, or we want the economy to be there to produce public goods and to help societies, right? And if we have the second more in mind, then we will have a different kind of economy and a different kind of financing for development and treatment of the finance. So I think they're making a very good point. Unfortunately, they are not here with us to elaborate more, but you can see the article. Yuriko.
Yes, hi. I think that is a really important point, Sakiko and Isabel's point, um, and including in terms of public spending by developing countries, the global South countries, because really on these issues and the issues that are of fundamental importance for the people of those countries, the main financing has to come from the domestic sources. So I think this is something that needs to be discussed. And especially since there is a tendency in many countries of decreasing social spending. And I think the attitude of the U.S. government right now, I think, is aggravating that tendency. I mean, the defense secretary was just in my part of the world, hectoring the governments to increase their defense spending. And so that's an issue also for countries like mine, Japan, that social spending is going down in relative terms, whereas there's this great pressure to spend more on arms. And I don't know whether in the meeting there is space to discuss that issue, and particularly, the competition of posed by pressure to spend more in defense.
Thank you. You have not seen something in the draft outcome document, but certainly, uh, even in the charter, it says that there have to be disarmament negotiations and arrangements to decrease the number of resources that are diverted to armaments instead of going for the fulfillment of social and other needs. But yeah, it's very important. Arthur.
And I think these points illustrate that the financial system is totally divorced from the real needs of the countries. When Tim Jackson was modeling where we were going sustainability at the Rio Plus 20 summit, he said he had to do three different models: a model of the environmental system, a model of the economy, and a model of the financial system, because it was totally separate and have not really connected even to the economy. And we're trapped as in a context of national sovereignty, where the nations come first. And I think this is what it should be addressed at this financing conference: is how can we move to some kind of global taxation? Because at the moment, any country that tries to say tax the rich, people say, oh, the rich will just leave our country to some tax-free haven and escape from taxation altogether. Have to keep taxes low to keep the rich in our country. I live in Switzerland, and that's the dialogue all of the time. We don't want to lose the wealthy people from Switzerland. So the finance for development should be looking at issues of some kind of level playing field for taxation at the global level, both corporate taxation, because they escape from paying their responsibility, and wealthy individuals who also, their fortunes escape from taxation. They pay less than anybody else. So I think that's a key financial question, because all the governments are struggling between, the requirements now for the possible war coming and so on. Where all the money is in the private sector and in private wealth hands. And that's escaping from any kind of social responsibility. So I think issues of global taxation and somehow overcoming this fragmentation so that everybody pays their just share needs to be an important part of the financing issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. And I think there is a process of international corporate tax conference and some negotiations. Yeah, but I'm not sure which way they are going. And I think they are in parallel, right, to this. They're not perhaps fully connected, although they should be, to the Financing for Development conference. If anybody knows more, please say it. I just have heard about it, but I'm not familiar with that technical tax issues. But you're right. I mean, this, as long as there are tax havens, etc., and people can go from one to the other, play governments, and some governments also offer, even the serious ones who tax systematically, they do offer loopholes if people come to their country, right, to attract investment. Barry.
Thank you. Since you asked, I think I can say a few words about the financing for development and the tax business. There is a separate process in the General Assembly to try to negotiate framework convention on tax cooperation. And the model here is the framework convention on the environment, global warming. Under the framework convention, the UN framework convention on the environment, you have different agreements, right? So the idea would be there would be a framework convention on tax cooperation, under which they could have agreements on how to share earnings of corporations that operate in multiple countries. There is okay, so this is at a rather early stage, and once they get the framework convention, if that happens, then it's negotiating the individual agreement, and the U.S. has already walked out, so any agreement that would be reached would not apply to, I guess, any U.S. taxpayers or any U.S.-based corporations or anything like that. So it's really pretty early stages, and maybe consensus will develop at some point around what to do. Financing for development is really kind of an envelope, and the original idea really was, back in the late 1990s, when a group of Latin American governments got this thing going, was essentially to bring the Bretton Woods institutions into the UN, in the sense that they could have interactions between finance and foreign ministry people and between the different international organizations. Some people think, some of my friends in the NGO world would like to see a lot of decision making moved from the Bretton Woods institutions, whose decision making is based on how much money you put into the organization, to the UN, where it's one country, one vote. That isn't ever going to happen, but it is possible to influence the discussions, and in the sense that the Bretton Woods institutions have bought into the Sustainable Development Goals. You go to the World Bank, you see the SDGs all over the place. So at least that they appreciate the rhetoric. Getting things done is something else. And I would think there's one last point, which is that I don't see much room for agreement globally. There will be groups of countries, different architectures on different issues, and that's the only way I can see any progress being made. There is, however, there already has been, let's say, at the International Monetary Fund, some agreement on, for example, on paying attention to social issues. They have, in 2019, they adopted a policy on social spending, which they define as social protection, education, and health. And they basically are telling their staff members, when you go to countries, pay attention to these things, because when we don't, governments can be overthrown. I mean, they don't quite put that into the text, but it's an important issue, and as well as a sense, I should think, IMF staff. There are human beings in the IMF as well as finance people. So, but now the issue.
Revelation, thank you.
Yeah, but now the issue is just to make it happen, which is at the country level. So it's about, politicking, lobbying at governments to promote the social spending, to make sure they do not fire nurses, when there's austerity, that the social costs and ultimately the economic costs are so great that they have to push for, a more socially responsible austerity. Let's put it that way. And which also means deeper debt relief and more funding. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. If I can ask like a couple of clarificatory questions. What is your background related to this? I mean, what's your starting point?
Yeah.
Second is, you spoke some coalitions of the willing. And the third one, anyway, is that the 15% minimum tax for companies, let's say, is it part of the negotiations? If you can remember, I can repeat them. But first from you, your experience. Yeah.
Okay, who am I? The coalitions of the willing, then the 15%.
Yes.
I'll do it in reverse order. 15%, forget about it. It couldn't be adopted. For the others, the 15% is there was an agreement through the OECD for sharing of taxes paid by multinational corporations. Actually, only the largest. In any case, even under the Biden administration, they couldn't pass it. And you can be sure under the Trump administration, forget it. So I think that's just dead. They have to rethink the whole approach. Coalitions of the willing. Well, it depends. I think you can expect that the FFD agreement will be adopted by both. The US will vote against. Perhaps Argentina will vote against, and Israel will vote against. The US and its acolytes. But then the question is, how will these other coalitions emerge? So there is also something going on. It's called, I think, the Platform for Financing for Development, where governments individually or in groups will pledge to do things. And so watch that, and that may help answer. Um, the issue of the tax cooperation, by the way, the tax treaty, is very much the result of the African group of governments coming together and demanding together. So it's possible for different coalitions to be effective, but the question is who participates. Okay, who am I? Well, I was a colleague of Sakiko's. I did teach at the New School for some time, but um, I, I spent 30 years at the UN. I was involved in financing for development and the conference and other things.
Thank you.
I'm
You were not
old.
at the IMF,
No, but
but you vouch that
not
they are
at
human beings. Yes.
yeah. So we dealt with the IMF and the World Bank and so on.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And I've also worked with nice people from those institutions, no problem. But Daryl,
No, Georges, I just wanted to underscore what Barry has just put on the table around the urgency for this tax reform. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie or the documentary Tax Wars. And it might be a worthwhile exercise to call in one of your meetings, Georges, for the playing of that video, because it explains very clearly how the multinationals are actually sucking the developing world dry, where they choose tax havens to be taxed in, and then through entries, accounting and fictitious entries, they basically make the country in which the investment is, their companies there are running at losses and that sort of stuff. But in the tax haven, they are making massive profits. So when you look at the African situation, for example, there's this great investment into foreign direct investment, putting factories and mines, etc., into Africa. But at the end of the day, these mines are not making profits. The profits are being made in the tax-free havens. And this issue that Barry referred to, the tax reform, how to tax multinationals, they've got a very interesting proposal where the tax of the multinationals will be shared based on where the company's turnover or whatever the case may be. But the point is that not only do you have the impact of colonialism, this is really a new form of colonialism, where they say they're putting in foreign direct investment, but who is that foreign direct investment actually helping? Is it helping the local economies, or is it helping the multinationals get rich? The second one, the obvious answer.
right? So, I mean, we have all of these jurisdictions that even compete to attract this investment, right? Even in Europe, we had like cases where the big IT companies went to certain countries and they were taxed very little, right? Or yeah, and they produced all their profits went there and they were taxed very little. So they can justify their profits for purchases, etc., but they don't pay taxes. And globally, this is repeated in even worse, I suppose. So yeah, we need, if you have big companies that play the world, we should have something global to watch them where they put in this. But of course, they would sabotage it, and they have influence on politicians and others. Like we see a question in the chat by Anthony, who says, of course, more tax cuts eventually get passed, for example, by the US Congress, and Musk and other super rich will pay even less, while the total debt, which burdens everybody, increases. Anthony, if you want to say something more to it, no. But yeah, we see that happening within countries, and we don't see, though, anybody responding from or reacting from those who, even the small owners or whatever, they think they are the private sector, I don't know, and they benefit from tax cuts, but overall they have to shoulder a bigger burden of debt for the sake of the richest, which is very weird that can go through like this. But yeah. Any other comment on this? I would expect Arthur to say also, in addition to neglecting the social aspects, this financing for development neglects also the environmental aspects, right, of funding and how, where it goes and how it's used. And somehow I see even the European Union in agreements with countries, they put environmental clauses which can be used afterwards. Politically also, to say, oh, these imports have a too big of a carbon footprint, and there you see perhaps an abuse of that principle. But there are other things that could be seriously done if investments went to, let's say, renewable energy sources or things like that. Arthur, please.
Well, I think there are many of these trade agreements that are now being debated, but they've been against that, have, in a sense, they protect corporations' profits from any kind of government interference. So if a government wants to legislate for environmental protection, they can be sued by the company for the profits lost. And not just, and this is what happened recently in Greenland, where a company had wanted to create a mine, and the mine would have produced a lot of radioactive pollution that have damaged local people. So their election was held, and people voted against the mine, and then the company was sued for $600 billion for all the profits they imagined they might have been able to make had they been able to open the mine. There's sort of a global imagination of guessed future profits, and these, this whole system is corrupted at the very core by this search for profit above all else. And there's so many ways that companies have, over many decades, have been organizing things for their own benefit and not for the benefit of people. So finding some way to rein in, those interests and to put the larger common interest forward is an enormous challenge today, because there's so much already built into the system. I mean, even the wealthy countries have their own tax-free havens. In America, the state of Delaware, where corporations be registered without revealing who their shareholders are. The United Kingdom has the Jersey, in the Channel Islands. So they've even created their own tax-free havens within their own context, to play the game for the benefit of the corporate sector.
You're right. And this is impossible when the countries have to go through arbitration processes that favor companies, let's say, and even may give them the compensation not of 600 billion that they're asking, but quite a bit, right? Even the European Union, I think now countries have started to get out of this treaty on energy with energy companies. I cannot exactly tell you what the title is, but the clause that was there, that you exit now and it comes into effect, this exit, that you don't are not subject to this kind of arbitration 20 years later or something like that. So they are colonial treaties, but the colonialists are the companies and the governments who accept to sign them, the treaties with them. Yes, colonizing their own people, which is amazing. Unbelievable. I'll start using Trump language. This is amazing. It has never happened before and all that. Maybe we should use some kind of similar language to fight back. Yeah, so I mean, from what I heard here is we don't expect big, perhaps, departures in Seville, but we can also expect a vote and some kind of document that repeats at least the 0.7% of ODA. But we see now that the US has dissolved USAID, and of course they won't abide by anything like 0.7 or even less. The European Union, other European countries are also increasing their defense spending, and they are reducing the amounts that they give for overseas development, for official development assistance. So this is in general bad news. We may not get what we had before, even on paper. Yeah. Any other comment or suggestion? We can close earlier than usual, no problem. If you don't have comments, and I hope that you all follow this conference and its outcome. We will also produce some articles afterwards. We may have another meeting like this to discuss the outcome. But in the meantime, yeah, any other comment? It is important, and we decided to give more attention, pay more attention. That we're not economists. Our focus was more like broader global narrative and governance, sustainability. But we think we have to face this, how the economy works, or rather how finance works, which is not even connected to the real economy, and all these things how are not connected to society and the environment, and we have all these problems. So we will continue. The next, oh yes, Ivana, and Yana afterwards. Ivana.
Hi, thank you. Oh, I'm not sure if you see me. There we go.
Now we see, yes.
Yeah, maybe just to highlight, because we've repeated about the social impact and about how we have to relate the finance and all of these technical discussions to people's real lives. The way that the inequalities that we've discussed about climate and environment and about the colonial powers come together, the way that I see it has to do with women, and the way that these inequalities and power differences are still being played out in the field of women's everyday lives. We don't have access to the same type of finance, and the topic of gender equality, as we know, is in a very difficult situation right now. But it is one of the most important ones to hold on to the language that we already have. For example, in the first draft, there are some good mentions to the care economy, to combating like gender-based price differentiation. So these are good, but we need to really find a way to strategically push for more, because it's a way to it's not only a moral imperative like we discussed at the beginning, but it's really a smart thing to do. We know that we have better resilience and climate adaptation and mitigation outcomes when we include women and girls, and if we have gender equal societies that are, yeah, if we have a finance system that works to create gender equal societies, then we have just better outcomes overall and a stronger resilience to the challenges that may come in the future. So that's my perspective. Just thought to share that, and hopefully you agree and we fight towards this together.
Absolutely. And microfinancing, I think, has already demonstrated that, right? Women with a bit of help and financing, they are more responsible, they pay back, and they increase the well-being of their society, of their families first, I suppose, and societies. Yeah. But it's also a matter of an internal matter, right? There is the social summit of the UN that will be coming up in November, right? Another opportunity to discuss such things. There, the social will be the focus. But even in countries themselves, I mean, we ask for financing to take that into account. But do you see that within the development of individual national economies that women are taken seriously as they should? We demand from the developed world, let's say, in the financing, take that into account. I don't know if governments themselves do that. Yeah, I I hope that changes also the patriarchal structures within societies, right? Yeah. Thanks. Jan or Jan? Yes. Sorry.
Yes, I think that we have an overview that many of us have been struggling with, trying to understand for many years as things have gotten more and more complex in our countries. I'm in the Latin American region, but I'm uncomfortable leaving this meeting without our saying something about, what's happening with a new narrative. How can we organize ourselves to think outside of the box? I work with the local human rights defenders in Latin America, and at the local level, there's a lot happening. People are really trying to come up with alternative ways of looking at the situation. And so I'm just wondering, from the perspective of this group, where do we go from here?
Thank you. And thanks for reminding us that the search for a new narrative is cuts across all our activities. We said last time that more fun, less stuff, and that is also a way to approach sustainability, right? Which is a bit like a new non-development model, because even development itself in, implies growth and more resource use, etc. Some people are more strict about that. Some others, yeah, they try to find a middle way of continuing consumption, but not as much is increase, things like that. What could we tell young people also to look forward to and to aspire for themselves, if it's not for profit, new things all the time, right? And things that are a model that is a bit self-destructive or cannot be sustained by our planet and society. So yeah, please, contributions to that any time. Anybody from the youth section here? I saw Jason appearing, perhaps to make a comment or not.
No, not really. I'm just taking it all in for today.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Rowan, thanks. What could this, let's say, appreciation of new technologies by the youth, could it become like an alternative? So we live more online and we leave the environment or resources less less used outside. Is there an alternative where, let's say, the economy and well-being are more attuned, even if it is at the meta cyber level? Or has anybody thought of that? Or
Uh,
yeah, the IT is also costs resources. But tell me, yes,
if I
Jason.
may, about what you just said, I don't think that's where it would be going if we switch to a more online sort of existence, which we are. And I've been seeing that I'm the first generation that kind of grew up with the internet. Like I'm 28 and it started becoming really a thing when I was 12, 13. So like, we really started also living on there. Um, But I don't think it's helpful to think about it as an alternative living space because, I mean, the real world is the real world. And that's obvious by itself that it should be protected and, you should try to keep a connection with it. But also on the more practical level, the way that the internet is developing is making itself more resource intensive rather than resource saving, let's say. So now with the advent of AI, I heard something along the lines, I'm not sure, and don't quote me on this, anyone, but every chat GPT search you make consumes like a gallon of water or something like that. So just maintain, even if we want to follow our escapism, which is really tempting in these times, and go hide out in the digital world, the way that it evolves is draining the planet even more than considering alternatives on how we could get back to the IRL space and figure out a viable future through the craziness that's happening now.
This is not the way to the post-material world, then, exactly the idea.
No, I'm not ready to upload myself to the cloud yet.
And then
Not
somebody
yet.
switches off the servers, and there you go.
Yeah.
Arthur.
Oh, well, artificial intelligence, it's highly energy intensive. The consumption of these enormous servers and the whole system, again, is driven by the corporate sector with profit as its first goal. It's not being driven as a tool for social connection or for education of those who are deprived of education and so on. The potential is there, but as long as it's trapped within the corporate system where profit is the thing that counts, it's all been taking the wrong direction. So we have to change those basic drivers first. And you set a whole new set of goals for society beyond just more material accumulation and more profits for the corporate sector. And that's where we're trapped in that system. And until we break out from that system and acknowledge that maybe there are higher human purposes than more and more material consumption, and that maybe there are more more valuable ways of relating to other people than simply over Zoom, screen face to screen face, but actually in terms of direct human contact, community building at the local level, and so on. We need a whole new set of values and purposes to go in another direction.
Yeah, great. I mean, Arthur, you remind me of at some point there was the Edison and electricity, etc., and it was private, and then it became public when it became a common good, clearly, right? Now it's privatized again, but in Europe and I think even in the US, it was absorbed by the state at some point when, right, it was run by the state. Are we at a phase where this IT, AI, etc., could be nationalized and internationalized? No. Should we push for such a thing, or?
I think definitely. I mean, as long as it's, and if it's actually, it's gone beyond the market system in the sense that it's become a monopoly system. The companies have become so big that they've swallowed up all the competition and, are able to control things for themselves and drive it in the direction. I mean, I was born and raised in a place now called Silicon Valley. Bill Hewlett was my next door neighbor, back when he was setting up Hewlett Packard. So I've seen this evolution ever since the beginning, but it's all gone in the wrong direction. And it's not driven by any kind of higher human purpose than profit at the moment. And and it's become so powerful. We can see how it's bought out the American government, and in many other ways, it can lobby or corrupt whatever it needs to do to get its way going forward. Fill the sky with satellites so they can compete to control communication from space and so on. It's all again trapped within that wrong paradigm, and so it's not taking us the direction we need to go in. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we repurpose such things and see the different uses that they can have? And we are using them differently than perhaps intended by their profit-making uh, originators, but not to the extent that we can really change their course, right? Or the course of history. Yeah, any ideas or I know that I was trying not to use, let's say, the main big five IT companies, etc. But if you go to other smaller open source enterprises or individual efforts, then you don't have the same uh, compatibility. You don't have the same functions that you're used to. They don't have the all the experts of to make it look good, to do this and that. So it is more difficult to be alternative, and then you fall back into the hands of the oligopoly or monopoly de facto. Yeah. Yes, Rowan.
This conversation reminds me of my youth, when also around 12, 13, when we kind of migrated onto the online space. And nowadays, it's only been 10 years, but we call it the Wild West days of the internet, right? Where there was it felt like less regulation, but that those freedoms really were taken away by the monetization of the ability to create safe spaces for children or safe spaces for certain communities. Because the prices of holding a server were increasing or being taken up by these big fives. And I think I dislike the idea of more governance of this space. I don't think that really is the solution. But there is something to be said about governance of those companies or those big peoples or big groups that access that space. I think that could be a route that governments or lobbyist organizations could go towards in terms of perhaps making a more sustainable internet. And these are just ideas. I would probably have to do a lot more research into it, but
Please explain a bit more what you mean. You mean no government takeover of those? We know the bad aspects also of public administrations or government control, or civil service somehow inefficiencies. But what did you mean by governance of those who use these spaces?
Essentially, I think I agree with the idea that we kind of are living with oligopolies or a monopolization of these online spaces and the culture of the internet nowadays. With you kind of see it with how when Elon Musk took over Twitter and the sudden realization of, oh, actually, we do so much of our things on Twitter. There are so many artists hosting their commissions there, or people organizing these pride events, these social gathering events on Twitter, that when someone comes in and they take control of that space, it really impacts people's abilities to do things online. And all of the other offshoots like Blue Sky, or I forget the many offshoots of Twitter right now, are also run by certain organizations or really, really specific groups of people, that it is still rather restrictive to the overall like audience of people who use the internet. So instead of governing the space of the internet, say like allowing what can be shown, allowing who can access what spaces on the internet, almost like trust breaking, I suppose. Some regulations on what the companies that control these spaces can and cannot do, rather than what anyone can and cannot do on web servers. I hope that makes some sense. Or I, yes, yeah.
If you want to explain a bit more, you would be welcome. But yeah, to target more the users and to,
Yes.
yes, and create the ethical conscience and what they do and cannot, should not be doing within themselves, in that group, maybe. Yeah. Let's all think through that more. Thanks. Alternatives are always welcome. And Pratul is saying, Pratul, why don't you say that instead of writing it on the side?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add to that point. I think that was very interesting one. I was, in fact, reading a book uh, written by an ex-global public policy head at Meta, and she was earlier a diplomat in to the New Zealand government. And she said that we think that because it's big corporations like Meta, well, we would assume them to also act as some sort of a moral agent. But it just happens to be when she joined that she described the entire company as people, nothing much more than 14-year-olds trying to control other 14-year-olds and then get towards the battle of the space, which is our screen.
So we need adults in a good meaning, the good meaning of the world to govern this. But how do you do it? I mean, those 14-year-olds, they are billionaires and they can pay for their election campaigns of politicians, and they can also pay for our civil society organizations or not pay. So they call the tune somehow more and more. So how can they be disciplined or made to think ethically, or those who use their tools uh, think more ethically, and then they also by association fall into place? Or so yeah. Many of these, I mean, like if you see the Meta lineup, they had a former deputy prime minister of the UK. I don't know if he resigned. They had other people that are big names. I don't know if they do work, but certainly they give credibility to these organizations, right? And also a public face to, which is respectable. Then it becomes more than just the people making money. They do that, but they also really influence the public space. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Jan.
I think we need those of us who are concerned about morality and ethics and human rights and have essentially dedicated our lives to working on these issues. And maybe we don't have much money because maybe we've been supporting other NGOs during our professional lives. but I'm not sure that money is everything. And I think that we need to be better organized. I think we need stronger dialogue like what you're hosting here. I think definitely we need more creativity and innovation in our thinking. I think we need more spirit. We need more inspiration. And we need to connect more with people like Bill Gates and Jeffrey Sachs, who came once to talk to us here. There are people, Timothy Schneider, who has moved to Canada. There are people who think the way we do, but we're not organized enough. And they are, the other guys are. And you've all mentioned I'm not going to give an executive summary of what's already been said. We know who they are and we know what they're doing. And those of us who are futurists also have a pretty good idea of what this is all going to lead to, right? So it's not happy and there's not a lot of time, but I think that we're underestimating ourselves, Georgios. That's what I want to say. I think that in addition to reflecting in this kind of a fora, we need to push more on dialogue and constructing different kinds of scenarios for the future that we want.
Great. I think I agree with you. We underestimate ourselves, and hopefully, I mean, we have more influence within our own societies if we want to, and by changing our own behaviors, etc. I think we do create waves if we're really sincere about our changing our ways towards the more sustainable, the more social, the more whatever solidarity and things like that. But you mentioned Bill Gates and Jeff Sachs. Jeff Sachs I've interacted quite a bit with. He has his own past, of course, with let's say the privatization of the Russian economy and other Eastern European economies. He seems to be really now on a course to tell the truth and to honestly change things. And he's not mincing his words, especially about the US responsibility for Ukraine or the Middle East, etc. It's remarkable. And I think, yeah, we have to benefit a lot. Of course, everybody has their style and their, yeah, they may not be so liked sometimes because of personality traits, but I think that we can certainly work with him and others more. Would you think that Gates is the same kind of person? Because sometimes I see when he wants to dictate the health agenda, let's say for developing countries through also contributions of his foundation to the WHO and to national authorities, he has his three diseases that he wants to fight. He has his thing about not helping public health systems, which sometimes with his turning the health financing towards the three diseases that he wants to fight, then takes away from other health issues. So I don't know. Sometimes I think that even philanthropists, when they come from that sector, they're so efficiency focused that again, it's not a very human way to approach. But so who are our lives and who are we and all that? John, if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, well, let Jason go first, and then I'll say something about that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
no, I just wanted, because I was thinking about him today a couple hours ago, and it's super funny that you say that now because I was literally just thinking about it. I feel like this whole like philanthropist billionaire class is the ultimate smokescreen. It's almost Machiavellian, you know, it's like the good king, you know? Like the good king and the bad king, the good feudal lord and the bad feudal lord. It's like it brings in this paradigm of, look, through my monopoly and through my financial achievements and through this and this and that, which all happened completely in line with this broken system that we're all talking about, that we're trying to change. But look, through this, I am still human and I want to help. But it's not, you know, it's kind of give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish kind of situation. As in like, I do the thing, I control the resources, I exploit monopolies, I behave very violently in an economic way, in his economic logic. But at the end of the day, look, I give back, and I think that is, I mean, okay, and on the practical level, thanks, I guess, because yeah, it's obviously, good changes that have been implemented. But on the level of what that signals, I think it's very dangerous because it kind of so successfully diverts attention away from the main issue. Like Rutger Bregman came out on the Davos forum and he was like, we're all going around the subject, tax the rich. I don't see the Gates Foundation talking about, let's host a global forum and, bring delegates from all around the world to discuss the global financials. No, no, no. It's all about, I'll build this, I'll do that. I will, we'll boost the developing economies. We'll do all of these kind of, you know, again, on one hand, real concrete things that are great and thanks, but they're symbolic and like they're more tokens than they are lasting change. If it's not systemic, it's bread and circuses, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't know. That's my 5 cents.
Well, I think that I think we should invite him, and I think we should listen to him. I think that dialogue is critical right now. If we're going to judge everybody by their ability to control their egos, we're not going to get very far in solving the problems of the planet. I think in my old age, I have learned that. So we need to evaluate what this person has done with their life and what this person is planning to do over the next 20 years with their money and where they're headed and our capacity to influence them, because they don't have all the answers. And if we don't all put our heads together and come up with some better answers, we're not going anywhere. But I believe in ending on a positive note, because I come from a family that thinks that if there's one drop in the glass is half full. So, let's invite more of these people, Georgios, and let's listen to them. And then maybe we don't try to bombard them with our ideas, or maybe we do a little bit of that brainstorming, but maybe then we reconvene and come up with some strategies, or maybe we come up with some, I don't know. There has to be a better interaction of those of us on this side. We on this side, whatever we want to call ourselves. Those of us who believe in human rights and nature's rights, that's where I come at it. We have a lot of experience, we have a lot of ideas, we have a strong commitment. We have inspiration, we have spirituality we haven't talked about. I write on ending existential poverty, and I look at existential poverty not only in the way we have traditionally defined it, but in terms of poverty of soul, which is what, to me, is what's happened in the North. So if we think about what Mother Teresa has said, and Nelson Mandela has said, etc., there's a whole line of thinking that we're not promoting in terms of existential poverty. You can find my stuff online. It's at the Inter-American Court also. So there's lots to do. Let's invite these guys.
Sure, but we should not feel any poorer because of that. We are rich perhaps in other ways, right? So it has to be an equal dialogue if we attempt it. And I hope they respond, yes. Okay, let's do it together if you want, Sandra.
And Timothy Schneider, who is brilliant on Ukraine and a very, very profound person, I feel. He was at Yale and now he's at the University of Toronto, I think. He moved over there, yeah.
Yes, great. But we do have a plan for the next open consultation on the 14th of July. And we can continue also this discussion, but if we don't manage to get any of these people that we will invite by then for the next one, we will seriously attempt it. So you can see here the intention is next time to talk about the state-led global public goods provision and the potential UN regulatory role. And just to make it more clear, is Pratul's, whom you heard before, project with Fogs. He is one of our trainees for this summer, and he is interested in, and we are interested in, what he is going to find out about, let's say, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Gateway, the first of the Chinese, the second of the European Union. They create infrastructures, they get into deals, they also benefit from them, but they are sold more like these projects and initiatives like uh, common goods provision. But of course, they have their geopolitical and economic interests and considerations. Sometimes the UN is brought into them to help at the local level with the country teams. But then who is again checking on those people and these mega projects? They have to do also with indebtedness, because some of these projects are loans that are again given with small interest rate, but that is if it's connected to strong currencies, then the countries end paying up much more at the end, and things like that. So if you want to join us, Pratul will have prepared the background paper by then, will be the initial paper for his eventual mega paper, and he will invite some people and we can have a good discussion on this one too on the 14th of July. Please register. Yeah. Thank you.